MacKenzie, it's very nice to meet you. I'm Nathan. Thank you for being here.
Nice to meet you as well.
I think I might have mentioned in my emails, it's nothing too formal. I have topics that we might get to, we might not, but I'm not going to just segment it and ask you questions like a TV interview where it's just 1 minute sound bites. So we'll just get into a conversation and go. But I guess to start, you are the owner of Peak. It's called Climb and HIIT Studio?
Yeah,
Okay.
I am.
And how long have you been the owner of that? Did you start it?
I started it just as like boot camps for teachers actually after school in a gym and in my basement. So I guess if you include that part until we moved into our commercial space, it's been almost 8 years.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
And what prompted you to start that?
I was just seeing a need for people who hadn't really worked out before, so they didn't feel comfortable going into gyms. I have a personal training background too, so I wanted people to find a space where they felt comfortable to move their bodies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, I was reading your bio a little bit, and it seemed like that kind of stemmed from personal experience.
Yeah, like I was always a gym goer. I started working in gyms when I was 16.
Yeah.
Kind of like the bodybuilding type gyms, which is very different from what I'm in now.
Yeah,
but,
right, of course.
Basically, I dealt with cancer when I was 23. So after that, kind of rebuilding muscle and starting from zero, I felt like I could kind of connect with my clients on a different level, just knowing what it was like to start at zero. And yeah, I wanted a space where I could work out without people looking, and it's not super fun to work out bald.
Yeah, fair enough.
So I started like going to group fitness classes, and that's kind of where I found my passion for it. It was just like a safe space. Everyone knows your story, and you can work out in an environment that's like social and fun and motivating. So
That's awesome.
That's how it started. Yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt that.
No.
I totally forgot to bring water up. I saw you brought a water bottle. Okay,
I
you're
always
good?
have my own.
Okay, perfect.
That's okay.
Okay, good. Yeah, no, that's really cool. And so you're cancer free now?
Yes.
Yeah. How was that journey? Probably pretty enlightening.
Yeah, I was just finishing. Well, I think I had cancer during my internship for teaching, which I didn't know what it was. We thought it was mumps. We thought it was pneumonia, all these different things. It turns out it was Hodgkin's lymphoma. So I was diagnosed in February of my last term of school to become a teacher. So the College of Education was really good. They let me do everything that I could as I started chemotherapy. When I was finished chemotherapy, I basically started subbing, which was a little bit exhausting because I wanted a contract and I didn't want anyone to know I had cancer. So I just wore wigs and nobody knew. But yeah, that's kind of... The journey was wild looking back, but at the time you just do what you have to do.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I had this is obviously different, but I've got a friend who was in a kind of a similar situation, trying to get a contract because she was pregnant and she was trying to get one before she started showing.
Yeah.
But can they do that if they know that you've got an illness? Can they? Not
legally.
Okay.
No.
Yeah.
But I don't know. It's just one of those things where. It's just kind of sketchy. Like, like technically they would never say that. But yeah, I guess if you're pregnant, they might choose someone else if they have two equal candidates. Like legally they can't, but
yeah. I guess it's one of those things.
It depends
like,
if you disclose, and if you don't have a contract, you don't have a contract, and they don't owe you anything. So
true.
Yeah.
Cool. And so you're teaching now as well on top of the gym. What grade do you teach? Or
so I used to teach grade 6 late French immersion.
Okay.
That program got cut during COVID, and so I was able to get a position in elementary school in the city where I teach phys ed. So I'm full-time phys ed all day. I teach grade 1 to 8-ish range. So yeah, it's always busy and fun, but
I bet.
Yeah.
And so moving from, you weren't teaching phys ed at the same time as French immersion then?
I teach in French immersion still, actually, in phys ed.
Okay.
But I taught classroom as well. So I taught middle years classroom, French immersion usually. When I first started, I taught every grade, every language, anything to get a job. And then eventually, now I kind of have my dream job. So that's nice.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
And when you're going through education in university, I guess, do you have to specify French immersion at all, or is it just if you can speak French, you can?
I actually did not, like, you can do programs in French. I think U of S now has like they have French immersion students in the education program, but it's not a program entirely in French. That being said, I didn't actually go through any of that and didn't want to teach in French, but they, my school division asked me about it. Oh, we see that you speak French. Do you want to do that? And they kind of said, can you teach core French? Well, sure. Okay. I'll teach core French. I was a French immersion student. So that's kind of where that came from. But yeah.
And if that's where the job is, right?
Yeah. You do what you got to do to get that contract. So.
Yeah. And so you've got the gym and then you're teaching phys ed, and then you're teaching phys ed. Are you teaching phys ed, sorry, from understanding, in just French immersion or French immersion and online?
So I teach physical education in French.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Okay, so it's in a French immersion school.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Yeah. That makes more sense now. Okay.
Yeah, I teach at Victoria on Broadway. So yeah.
Is it hard? Sorry.
It's all French now.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's single stream as of 2 years ago, I believe. Yeah.
Cool. Is it much different? Like, it's mostly physical activities, so it's not like the language is much of a barrier, but...
No. Yeah. I think for the students, like, obviously it's their second language as well. I'm teaching in my second language, but I'm pretty comfortable. I've been teaching in French immersion for 10 years now, so for me it's easy. For the kids, sometimes a little bit harder when they're young, but they love it and it's fun.
Great.
Yeah. Grade 1 to 8, so yeah.
Yeah, that's a cool age too, because they've got tons of energy still, and I've never been a teacher, but I'd assume in that range still, like in elementary school, there's still they want to do it, burn off a little bit of steam more.
Yeah.
And you start getting older, the kids, they still need it, but they're kind of like, oh, I don't want to go to the gym.
It's about the middle years range where some kids don't love it as much, but the little kids really, really love it, and it's their favorite thing. So the hardest part about that job is, well, I'm on my feet all day, so move, which I like to do, but it can be exhausting. And the second part is just like making sure to keep the classroom management going, because they get really excited to be in there.
I bet. I know I was the bad student for that. I would just, if we weren't doing what I wanted to do, I was being a little shithead.
Trying to grab the basketball with it.
Yeah, or the do they still have the like, we call them scooters? I don't, but they like the plates with 4 wheels on them.
Yeah, we still have them.
Okay. I figured they might have taken them away by now, but that's funny.
Yeah, they're kind of hidden. I make sure that, well, I have seen kids run over their fingers with them. Yeah. So you just have to be careful. But,
yeah, of course. It's one of those things too. Where,
so fun though.
They are so fun, but then you gotta like keep an extra eye on everybody, and I know we used to. This was definitely not something the teacher came up with, but we would tie the jump ropes to each other, and somebody would sit on the scooter, and we'd just sling them around the room.
Yeah, they still know how to do that. If you leave them alone too long.
That's funny.
Yeah.
And so you talked about, so you went into school, you did education, and then now you're teaching phys ed and French immersion. You've got this gym.
Yeah.
And you were working in gyms since you were 16.
Yeah.
It seems like you've known for quite a while that fitness was kind of a pretty key part of your life.
Yeah, I love fitness. But I've actually, over the years, now that I'm getting older, it's like I've have a more well-rounded view of fitness, and a holistic health model is more my style now. That being said, like, the fitness part is so important, but I'm always learning new things about, like, maybe skeletal muscle is more important than we once thought. So I'm always up with the research and kind of looking at what are ways that people can move that'll keep them motivated to do it for life. Yeah.
That's cool. And so is that kind of what your doctorate is surrounded by?
So I did my master's in educational admin, so it's for leaders. But my focus was on teacher wellness. So I noticed there's a decline in teacher wellness since I started. And I noticed people are feeling stressed, people are feeling burnt out. A lot of my friends have left the profession, actually. So my master's focus was on, is there a way to build teacher efficacy and help them improve mood in schools? And so my first study was on exercise bursts for teachers, and if it was possible to do that throughout a work week.
Okay. Exercise what, sorry?
Bursts. So short bursts of exercise. I did like a HIIT inspired, so high intensity interval training inspired workouts. I wasn't monitoring like heart rate or anything, but we were just doing surveys and interviews to see if it improved over the 8 weeks, and it did. So
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah,
you
it was
hope
cool.
so. But
Yeah, and so my doctorate is actually in interdisciplinary studies because I wanted to do kinesiology as well as education. So that's why I went into InterD, and so far it's been great. I'm taking a kin course, and I'll be taking more ed courses, and then we'll create a study. But I had to do a proposal already just because it's an interdisciplinary program. You need to have your committee set. And so that took quite a few months. But my supervisors, so I have two, Louise Humbert. She was a phys ed teacher in the past, and she works in kin. And then Scott Tunison was my master's supervisor, and he somehow decided that it was okay to keep working with me. I thought he'd be sick of me by now, but yeah, we get along great, and he's just both of them are so great to work with because he's an education guy, and she has the pedagogy part. So, yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Oh my god, I just lost my train of thought.
That's okay. Yeah, so basically it's like we're going to the goal is to have more studies in this area with more of a holistic health model now. So my proposal was just talking about, okay, let's survey teachers. How are they feeling in schools? What do they think they need for wellness? And physical activity might be just more what they can do instead of like a set type of exercise. And then I wanted to include like mindfulness because I love mindfulness and learning more about that, and mindful movement, mindful eating, all these things. So the goal is to kind of create, I haven't done it yet, just kind of some ideas so far of what that model could look like in school or maybe multiple schools, and see if that can help teachers feel better. And maybe we need some money too.
That's always the problem, right?
Yeah. But I'm trying to create a model that doesn't cost a lot of money. And in my research previously, we know that if we keep our teachers well, they're better at their jobs and you have less absenteeism. So there's a lot of reasons that it saves school divisions money if they do implement it anyway. So, yeah.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Well, it's like there's that idea comes up a lot in economics and in business too, and I think people are coming around to it more often now, whereas instead of just like laying off underperformers, maybe investing in them a little bit, because your return on investment is probably going to be pretty significant if you can increase their just like you're talking about with exercising, just the way they feel about work, you know. Yeah,
exactly. And I think a lot of it is we're just like in the research that I looked at jobs, okay, like what makes workers productive. And one of the things I found was like that workers can only be productive in a desk job for max 3 hours per day. So then if we're forcing people to be in their desks, and there's always like outliers, but within that, if we're forcing people to be like in a desk all day, is that actually productivity? This 40-hour work week is something that I kind of think we need to change, but obviously that takes time and research and
well, and people like yourself talking about it, right? I was thinking about that the other day, because lots of places have half day Fridays, or just no day Fridays. Like there's lots of jobs that have a 3-day weekend now.
Yeah, there's a lot of like jobs. I know my husband works for Saskatoon, so they get an EDO every Friday, and just that little perk is so good for mental health and wellness. Even just having that extra day to get the stuff you need to do around the house, so you're not always feeling like you're frazzled, and so
it's perfect that way too. I mean, that's what I use it for. I have it's not always a half day on Friday, but my Friday is pretty flexible. So I'll do that. I'll come home and catch up on things or appointments, whatever you can't do during everybody else's work hours, right? So.
Yeah, and I think COVID really shifted that mindset of a lot of employers. They found like a lot of companies, they had just equal productivity and people are working less or hybrid, or just having more flexibility is really important, especially if you're a parent or have other things that you need to get done. Even just being able during your lunch hour to pop in a load of laundry or whatever you have to do, I think is really good for people. Yeah. They feel less stressed. Yeah, I
agree. And so this program that you're looking at kind of conceptualizing, is it something that you're looking at doing with having teachers implement or school divisions implement in the schools, or just something like a program that teachers can follow on their own?
Yeah, good question. I think that I would run it for like my research, and then if it went well, and we can kind of tweak it. So we want to use we're talking about the idea of like participatory participatory action research. So involving them in the process, like what works, what doesn't work. I found that really helpful last time with my teachers who were doing their short bursts of exercise. They kind of set up how that looked for them. And I think that's an important piece. You can't tell people what to do for their wellness, but you can ask questions and help them make decisions that will help their exercise and fitness and things like that too. So yeah. I don't know if that answers your question.
No, that answers it perfectly. Yeah, no, that's exactly what I was asking.
But I think eventually, like in my dream world, I would love to consult on this for school divisions. Like, how do we get teachers moving during the day? And that can include students. I think for myself, when I was a classroom teacher, I was always doing body breaks, always incorporating exercise, even just in nature as well. So getting them outside and moving a little bit throughout the workday. And I found that everything stayed the same levels, like reading levels, everything like that, if not went up. So it would be, now there's studies on, okay, if we do move, are we as productive? And
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. I mean, just because, like you said, you can only be productive sitting for so long. You get bored and annoyed. But also, for myself, I find personally that exercise, especially like difficult exercise, makes everything else easier too. It's not only that like I feel better and I'm more willing to go to work and do good work, but like I just started going to jiu-jitsu. I wrestled in high school, but I just started going to jiu-jitsu now to get back into the sport. It was really eye-opening for me because I thought I was pushing myself in the gym and like with weightlifting and other things, but after a couple practices, I realized that I haven't been pushing myself in a while. Yeah. And I was thinking afterwards, especially after the second session, that like nothing I'm doing is hard. No. And so when I come out of a practice, everything else feels easier. It's so much easier to get to work the next day because I'm like, this is not that difficult compared to what I was doing last night.
Yeah. And I think obviously we use what we learn in the gym so that everything outside of that gym is easier. Like you said, you can handle stress better. You can move better in your day-to-day life. So yeah.
When problem solving, I think, is a huge piece about it too. Yeah. Yes,
there's a lot of research on that, which I love to listen to. So yeah.
Do you know, like, is there anything, I guess, that would seem not obvious from the problem solving piece that you've heard about or read about?
Actually recently I've been learning more about stress and how we have one word for stress, but actually it's so many different things. Because if you think about the stress of work or the stress of someone dying or the stress of getting into a car accident, those are all very different types of stress. And so, they're just talking about maybe when we talk about stress, we need to kind of change the verbiage a bit so that we're not just saying, okay, I'm stressed because I didn't do this little thing, or I'm feeling very stressed because of this. And also like using stress to your advantage. So I read a book called The ADHD Advantage because I have ADHD. Okay. And so I learned ways to use my ADHD to my advantage to be productive and get things done and be happier. And with stress, they're now saying, okay, if you think of stress in a different way with a different mindset, that can kind of shift how your body responds to stress. So for example, they talk about, it was just a podcast I listened to, but this doctor was talking about how she did a study on people who are afraid of snakes. So they were sitting there and a snake would come by on a conveyor belt. And the first time they saw the snake, there was a lot of stress associated with that. And it was firing different parts of the brain. But when they talked about, okay, now we're going to use courageous stress, they call it. So looking at that snake now for the second time, thinking about your stress as being courageous, that shifted how the brain responded to the stress.
Wow. That's really cool.
So I think we're getting into some cool research that's going to help everyone, but with stress, essentially.
That's amazing too. I love when hearing about research like that and studies like that, because it's it makes really old ideas scientific and it brings them back to the public a lot, because that is an old idea, this idea that like what you really want is exactly where you don't want to look for it. Like you have to kind of go to where things are stressful and they're going to be hard. You can get better that way.
And I think we're often thinking of stress as, how do I reduce stress? How do I get rid of stress? And of course, there are strategies to do that. But if we think of everyone has stress and stress is there to help us in a way, how can we use that in a different way to get through life happier? Yeah.
Well, and like ultimately you have to, because it's not going away.
No.
Right? Like
No, you'll find new stress.
Yeah.
If this didn't stress you out before, now this does.
Exactly.
Yeah. So.
It's the same thing with fitness in general. The idea of getting healthy I had this idea for a long time, is that I'd go to the gym, get to the weight I wanted or the body composition I wanted, and then it was good. I would just coast from there.
Yeah.
It's not it at all. You have to continue doing it. And this, I think, like, and it sounds like you agree with me that stress is the same way. It's not that you get over this hump and you figure out how to not be stressful in life anymore. At least for most people. Yeah. It's something that you have to constantly take on as a challenge.
Yeah. And I think the fitness industry kind of did a disservice when we just focused on aesthetics for money or whatever the reason was. But basically, when you look at aesthetics, you're going to train differently than when you look at fitness as for life, for health. And so when I think of how I used to train, it was lose the most weight, get the tiniest, because that's what I thought was healthy. And now I train differently, where I know that the importance of strength training and how that can help your overall health, how that, when we're talking about cognition, how that improves cognition. And there's a lot of research on like why maintaining skeletal muscle is so important.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and then, because all those things too are also correlated with longevity, right? And so
yeah, and I think now we're kind of talking more about mobility. I got into yoga 10 years ago when I had cancer, actually, because I couldn't just go to the gym.
Okay.
And that's where I found, wow, my mobility has really improved my training. My mobility has improved my day-to-day life. I'm not as stiff and sore like sometimes I am, but it's like, oh, I'm getting stiff. Maybe I should go stretch it out. And I just feel like for my age, I'm almost 35, but basically for my age, I have really good mobility still, and I'm hoping I can maintain that as I age so that I can be like my grandma. She's 89, and actually it's her birthday today. I got to text her, but she's 89 today, and she just has really, really good mobility, and that's kind of my goal is, okay, I'm not going to focus on aesthetics because eventually that's not going to matter as you age. You just want to keep moving and living your life. So, yeah.
Yeah, those the people like your grandma are the perfect examples, because like you said, at some point aesthetics doesn't matter, and like, what do you really want?
Yeah.
You want to be able to move around, see your family and your grandchildren, and you're not going to get that way by sitting on the couch or by having a six-pack. It's about being functional.
And sometimes aesthetics isn't necessarily the most healthy for us. If that makes sense. Like, even during my cancer treatment, I gained weight. I gained 40 pounds really quickly. And that was like, oh my gosh, that's crazy back then when I had a different mindset about it. And then I realized my oncologist said to me, actually weight gain is a correlation with survival rates of cancer. And so I was like, that's weird. Like, what do you mean? Like, being fat's bad? And so then since then I've kind of learned more about obesity and why we're always taught that you don't want to be fat. That's the worst thing. But actually, instead of focusing on losing fat, we should be focusing on how do we build and maintain muscle.
Yeah. Did you find out why gaining weight correlates with higher survival?
With higher survival? I can't remember off the top of my head, but I'm guessing it's just you have more energy and you can use that when you start, like, you're not really moving. I know, like, for a lot of us, when we start losing weight, we're actually losing a lot of muscle first, depending. But yeah, I can't really remember exactly why. I have to look.
Well, yeah, and the losing weight and losing muscle thing is interesting too, because lots of people that like, there's a way to lose weight and maintain a healthy muscle mass, but lots of people that are dieting hard for aesthetic reasons don't realize that if you're not at least in the gym, like aesthetics being your goal is a whole different argument.
Yeah.
But if you're doing that and you're not at least in the gym or trying to maintain your body, it's not losing the type of weight that you want it to be losing if you're just living a sedentary lifestyle or at least not active lifestyle,
Yeah.
it's not going to lose the weight that you want to lose. It's going to be bone tissue and muscle, or bone mass and muscle tissue, unfortunately.
And like I think men too, but especially women believe that they need to weigh a certain amount. And when I ask them, okay, where did you get that from? Like, why do you think you need to weigh this specific number? And they don't know. They're like, I just think that's healthy. I'm like, well, what is health? What is being healthy? Is it looking a certain way? Because probably not. And yeah, so that's kind of how we train at Peak too, is we really focus on listening to your body. So we do offer cross training for that reason. So when I started, it was like the strength training, HIIT, because HIIT is, well, for me, it's like an easier thing to get in when you're really busy. But then now we've incorporated like Versa climbers for the cardio, but they also build muscle at the same time. And then now we do like a yoga style class, just because I really believe in the mobility. And recently we've done more strength and mobility classes for that reason. So today it's like you wake up, do you need to do a HIIT class? Not sure. So it's really hard to learn how to listen to your body and what it's telling you. And if you've trained a lot that week, do you need another class, or do you need a yoga, or do you need to maybe just take a rest day? And obviously there's a lot of reasons why people can't tell what their body needs, and part of that is because we ignore it. So when we're on a diet, like an extreme diet, a lot of the times you're ignoring your hunger cues, and you can't even tell when you are hungry because you're telling yourself, oh, I'm not hungry, I can't be hungry, I just ate. Well, did you eat enough for what you need that day? And should every single day look the same? Like with nutrition, I would argue no, but yeah. And I can go on and on about that, but
feel free to rant whenever you want. It's exactly what I'm looking for. But no, as well on the variety piece, like, should every day be exactly the same? Like, if you want to stick to your plan, it definitely shouldn't be, because you're gonna get bored. You know, like, you want it to be, you want a variety in there, at least for most people. Yeah, and I think there is benefit to doing strength or like a HIIT style class throughout the week, but I think when people think about, okay, what should I do? Oftentimes it was like to lose weight, right? So what do I need to do to lose weight? Do cardio every single day. But actually now we know that strength training, your EPOC is increased when you leave. So it's like, actually, when you look at what the calories say on a machine, that's not an accurate representation if you compare cardio to strength training. So it's very complex, and for people, they just think, oh, this celebrity does this. So they're probably selling you something. So it's like, where did you get the ways that you need to train? Like, is it evidence-based? Who's profiting from that research? And so I always look at things in a new way and kind of change my training up throughout the years. So yeah. The celebrity one is interesting too. Oftentimes, even if they're not selling something, they're lying. About how they did it. There are a lot of athletes who use Versa Climber, but I try not to showcase that in my gym, because I don't think that's the reason you should be doing it. I was going to ask about those. Are those the climbing machines that... Okay. So it's an upright climbing machine. It's contralateral movement, and it's momentum neutral. So it's really good for overall strengthening. And we're in an upright position, which we don't do a lot of. And for most people in their day-to-day, they're sitting. So you're actually standing, which is a really good position to be in. So, that's cool. Because I heard the name of your gym, and I just assumed it had a climbing wall. And so then when I was preparing for this morning, and I was looking at it, I'm like, oh, that's cool. I'd never seen a machine like that. So I actually got the concept out of the States, because Versa climbers are really huge there. They use them everywhere. A lot of like athletes use them, but it's also a really great rehab machine. I have a lot of pregnant clients because they can climb their entire pregnancy. It's safe. It's hard, and it's safe. That's cool. That's kind of where I got into it. I just wanted something that's efficient. So a Versa climber is more efficient than a lot of other pieces of cardio equipment, and you're getting your full body at the same time. So I do love other like types of cardio, but I just found I wanted more upper body as well. That's really interesting. It's just hard to find. Rowing is a good one too, but that's good. I hate rowing. That's another debate. We won't say that to one of my instructors, Natasha. She loves rowing. She was a rower, so yeah, that's fair enough. It's definitely like I just hate it because it's hard. It's not like it's anything.
Yeah.
I'm just a wuss. But.
Yeah, and vertical climbing is hard, but that's why we do rhythm-based classes. So
kind of like spin.
Yeah.
Okay.
In terms of being to the beat of the music. So it's high intensity, but we do climb and hit, which is 20 minutes on a climber. So anyone can really do that, but it goes to the music. So for me, it flies by. I always tell people it takes like 5 climbs to get used to it just because it's such a different machine. And the thing about vertical climbers is they target your weaker muscles.
Right.
So if your hamstring is weaker than your quad, your hamstring is going to get a workout as well. So that's why it feels so hard for people. They're like, oh my gosh, I can't do this because their core, maybe they're like, oh, my back's kind of bugging me, but it's because their core is strengthening as they do this. So
I would have never even thought about that, I guess, because you're working so many muscles. It's just whatever the limiting factor is going to be worked
yeah,
the
and
hardest.
because it's momentum neutral, like if you go onto another type of cardio equipment, you're using momentum to get through it, and you can kind of not slack, but you can kind of stop if you need, which on the vertical climber you can stop, but you still are getting a benefit even just by moving your feet slightly.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
And so momentum neutral, does that mean there's resistance constantly on the machine, or like what do you mean?
Basically you're propelling the machine. So when you're on the vertical climber, if you stop, it stops.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, unlike if you're on like a spin bike, if you stop, your feet kind of go for a bit more. So a vertical climber is just like if you stop, and I'm doing the moment. Yeah, so you're propelling the machine, I guess. Yeah.
Cool.
Which is why it's so great.
Yeah. And so you like, was the focus on HIIT and I guess you probably wouldn't have had a versa climber at this point, but
yeah.
Was the focus on HIIT or more weight training, or a little bit of both when you were like early on when you talked about doing private classes? Kind of, I think you said out of your basement. Or?
Yeah, so I was in my basement and outside in the summer because we love working out outside. Yeah. And then eventually moved into my garage, and then now we have a building downtown. But basically when I started, it was kind of that I was 20 some and I'm like, let's go, like go as hard as you can. But now I'm kind of like listening more to new research of it's okay, like bursts of high intensity is important for different reasons, but there's a way to train so that you don't actually have to be dying every single time. Yeah. A lot of people will be like, oh, my legs are burning so much, that's so good. I'm like, it's not necessarily what you need to do to have gains in the gym, but yeah, people still believe that mentality of like, we need to kill ourselves in the gym to have benefit. And I'm hoping that kind of shifts over the years of you don't have to go as intense as you think to gain things from it. So, yeah, in terms of like cognition, stress reduction, even skeletal muscle. But yeah,
that makes perfect sense. And I think that's another one of those things that social media is kind of doing a disservice.
All
at
the
least,
trainers on TikTok.
Yeah, exactly. At least like a lot of the fitness content I see is bodybuilding oriented, because that's still the way that I train primarily. But some of them I feel bad because a lot of it is young kids, or a lot of it is young boys seeing these videos, and then some guy on there just telling them to like pass out while they're deadlifting, you know, just like you don't have to go that hard. And
I would also argue that genetics plays a bigger role than is kind of showcased on social media. Everyone's like, oh, this is what you need to do to get my body. Well, our genetics are different. Probably you have a higher metabolism than I do, and different things that play into how you look. Yeah,
exactly. Because if you isolated every variable other than if you isolated every variable and you did everything the same, you're still not going to look the same at the end of the day.
Exactly.
I was just talking about somebody with that the other day, because I said, like, no matter, you can get, I can't remember why we were talking about it, but I said, you can get as lean as you want, but if your bicep doesn't have the shape that you want it to have, it's not going to have the shape you want it to have. It's just, that's the way your bicep is.
And that's why I think people, like bodybuilders, especially when I was at the gym, I worked in a bodybuilding gym essentially, and it was steroids. That's how you did it if you didn't have the genetics. So there's a whole other piece of the fitness industry that's kind of hidden still.
There's more honesty about it now, thankfully, but still lots of people lying, selling things.
And I would argue we still have a long way to go, because even people on TikTok and those things, it's like they're usually trying to sell you some sort of supplement, and so a lot of the times we think that supplements are better than, say, like, I don't know, like pharmaceuticals, but then a supplement company is still trying to make money. So we have to kind of like when you're thinking about supplements, why are you buying what you buy, and like who told you that, and where did they get that from, and is there research on it?
Yeah. And then also, like, so sometimes when you're looking at these people on social media, you're not necessarily at their level too. So if somebody's, even if they're like, you take the perfect athlete that's being perfectly honest and they're not trying to sell you anything, and they just do a video on the supplements they take.
Yeah.
The issue too is that people see that and they're like, oh, if I take those supplements, I will look like that. But the reason that athlete is taking that is because they've maximized every other facet of their performance. So they can take things that have diminishing returns.
Yeah. And like, you don't necessarily know what they're eating and what they're doing every day. Like, they might share things like that, but I would really be careful when you're trying to do what other people do, because your body is different, and your body, even like I was listening to this doctor talking about, he studies nutrition, and he was talking about how his body breaks down bananas differently than another person, and he was studying that and how that was, and so that's where I think like the mindfulness piece is so important, of listening when you eat certain foods. How do you feel after? Do you feel like your energy is better? And yeah.
Well, and like you said with telling people that it can take multiple climbs before you get used to the machine. It's the same way, like, really, it's the same way with your body. Like, if you go from not exercising a whole bunch, and then you go to the gym a couple times and you're like, I feel like garbage. I'm like, well, that's probably to be expected. But as you go for weeks, months, years, you'll start to know like when an off day is just an off day, or when it's actually a problem and you should take a break. Yeah.
And if I think I've been training in gyms for, almost 20 years, which is kind of crazy. But when people are coming in and they're comparing what I'm doing to themselves, it's like, well, I didn't start like that. And even when I had cancer and had to rebuild everything, it was like I could barely walk around the block. And so just coming in and doing a little bit is hard for people to wrap their heads around, because they want to match everybody in the room. So I think like the disservice of comparing yourself to other people, whether it's on social media or going into the gym and being like, oh, look at what that guy's doing, I should be doing that. That is like, I guess the detriment of fitness is like, you actually need to find out what, first of all, your health goals are, and then how do you program based on what you need as well as how you're feeling. Which I think we're starting to get there, but
I think so too.
Yeah, we're learning more.
Well, to reiterate a point you've made a bunch of times, it's like the key word is you, right? It's not, everybody wants to everything in life, a quick and easy solution, but especially with the gym, it needs to be something that works for you, but also there's no escaping the fact that it takes time and consistency.
Yes.
And so.
And I have like a lot of clients or people who will come in and they're like, hey, I'm going to go from not working out at all to 5 times a week. And I actually always talk to them. I had a girl, she's been training with us, a woman, she's been training with us, 4 or 5 years now. But when she first came in, that was her mentality, is like, I need to work out all of the time for whatever the reason is, most likely weight loss. But I said, well, you've just gone from never exercising to coming into a gym. That's a huge first step. You need to be proud of that step. And then just come once a week. Maintain that for a while. And then maybe it's twice a week. What's maintainable for your lifestyle? And like, if you're coming in from 0 to 5 days a week, your whole lifestyle has shifted now. And so maybe you were going out for wings every Wednesday and now you're going to the gym instead. So of course that's hard to maintain, because it's not what you were doing before and you're just completely changing your life. So I think you need to build routines slowly and find what works for you, like health-wise and happiness-wise. But, yeah.
I think so too. Especially because when you go to the gym and in situations like that, when you're trying to make a drastic lifestyle change like that, it's not just habit and behavior that you're changing. You're actually like ultimately changing who you are. If you're going from being somebody that doesn't exercise and is...
Your beliefs are changing, your values.
Yeah. And so there's going to be a little bit of time where there's not congruency between what you're doing and who you believe you are, because your mind needs to catch up to your body. Your mind still thinks that you're somebody that goes out for wings every Wednesday.
Yeah.
Now you're taking it to
Which
the gym.
Which is still fine, but I think for myself, I've really shifted like why am I doing what I'm doing? Am I doing this for myself? Am I doing this for something else? Because I think we are truly happy when we live our values. And so if our value is fitness, but we're currently not working out, that can lead to unhappiness. But in order to live your values, you need to build routine and maybe some rules for yourself, which would just be like, I'm going to go move 1 hour every day. And maybe doesn't need to look a certain way. Maybe it's just going for a walk, doing some yoga, lifting weights, whatever you need to do. But I think that is kind of what builds consistency, is having rules that are maintainable, but not necessarily goals, if that makes sense.
No, yeah. No, it does make sense.
Yeah.
Well, like, just think about anything else that we do too. Like, I think a board game is actually a good example of this, is like, if you take a super complicated like strategy game and you just sit down and somebody like spits off the rules like top to bottom to you like, and then you start playing, everybody's like, I don't know what I'm doing still. And so the easiest way to play typically, I think for most people, is you go through a couple rules and you start and you get to a point, and then the person that knows the game goes, okay, so that's what we do, or now this is what we do in this situation. You got to do that with the gym too. You can't just jump in and try and plan every single thing out.
Yeah, and like going back to like physical education, I think myself being like, I'm the first female phys ed teacher for a lot of these kids in the school that I'm at, because they've always had male phys ed teachers. So for a lot of girls, they see me and they're like, oh, there's a woman who's doing this. That's interesting. And also just like finding ways for kids to find inclusive ways to move. So I'm doing circus arts now. Circus arts. Okay. So one of my friends, Lyndon, he is a believer of inclusive phys ed, and so he started researching circus arts and found that was a way for every single kid to be proud of what they were doing and kind of move in a way where they could find something that they liked and enjoyed doing that wasn't necessarily like competitive or comparing to other people. So it's more celebrated, like, oh, this kid can juggle. I have students who love stilts, and they're not necessarily the best athletes when it comes to basketball or soccer, but they get on stilts and everyone's like, wow, that's incredible. So it's just finding ways for people to feel that success in movement that isn't necessarily the norm. And I'm hoping that if we start with kids, eventually when we become adults, they are going to find different ways to move that isn't necessarily always the gym. And maybe my goal is that they're active for life. So yeah. Well,
I don't think it's unreasonable at all, because that's one of the great things about the internet, is you can find other people that are interested in the same things for you. So you never know, maybe one day there'll be gyms on the corner that focus on stilts.
Well, there are.
Are there?
Yeah, there's circus schools.
There you go. Yeah, because if you look, like, you go back, like, I'm sure like 50 years ago, it's if it wasn't there at all, it would have been uncommon.
Yeah. And I think the hard part for people is we associate like working out with torture. And so that's why it's kind of hard for a lot of people who have never done it to get into the mindset of, I need to go lift these weights. But there are different ways that you can build muscle that doesn't need to look as traditional as we think. So, yeah.
Is it hard to work on circus arts and phys ed class? Like, it seems, because it seems like it'd be so multivariate. That
it's a, like, I'm in this pilot project right now, so there's a few schools in the city that have this equipment because it costs money to get the equipment. But I have started building a program with the phys ed teacher that I work with there. So we're doing juggling and stilts and pogo sticks. And pogo sticks are actually really good cardio that a lot of kids love. So that's one. And then it kind of incorporates gymnastics. And gymnastics is so good for different reasons of like building muscle. And and most importantly is joy. So can these kids experience joy while they're being active? Yeah.
I imagine you have students that just don't want to do anything at all ever in the gym?
So it's funny that you say that, because I don't.
Okay.
Necessarily, because I always try to find something for them to connect with. And I think that's kind of like the traditional view of phys ed is like people sitting on the sides, but it's like, why are they sitting on the side? They haven't connected with movement in the way we kind of did a disservice to them. Maybe it was that they were always playing dodgeball and always the target of the dodgeball. Like nobody wants to, that's not fun. It's not fun for anyone except the kid throwing that ball really hard at them. So for me, like I had a couple girls this year who are kind of like, not really loving certain things. So I chatted with them more of like, okay, so like, what is it about this that you're not loving? And a lot of the times it's the competition or the comparing, like this kid can do that and I can't do that yet. And so phys ed is one of the things where our competencies are on display, right? So I've kind of found a way to balance that of, okay, you don't want to play this type of game or this thing that we're doing. What if you did this? Like, I have like a back hallway. Like, what if you go move in this way? Or like, what would help you enjoy this today? So it's just kind of looking at it in a new way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. Because now thinking back on it, thinking about where that question comes from is from kids having classmates that didn't want to do anything in gym, but
and a lot of the times it's like high school beep test. It's
that's
like,
what yeah,
nobody wants to do that. I don't actually, when I first started training, I did fitness tests with my clients, and I do not do that anymore because I know that is not helpful.
Yeah. Well, and like, what are you, like, ultimately, what are you getting out of it? Because if it's like... And
if it's physical fitness, so I would have clients who would do, like, they'd maybe hadn't worked out before, they would do a fit test, and so it would show improvement, but eventually it doesn't. Because you can only go so far. So eventually they start to feel discouraged because their motivation is coming from something that eventually, unless they're like an elite athlete, is going to level off. And even those elite athletes experience a lot of sadness and stress, and like I don't know, other things that happen when they're no longer at that extreme level. So that's why I think it's so important to find joy in movement in different ways. And if we're moving to be mobile and to live in a way that like brings us happiness and functionality, and we start training that way, it never ends, right? You're going for the social connection. You're going because you feel good. You wake up the next day and you have more energy.
Yeah.
So I think once you start shifting your mindset to that, I have clients who've been with me for 8 years, which it's like, because they know like they're doing it for themselves. It's not to like hit a certain weight, or it's not to gain a certain amount of muscle. It's like that experience when they're there, that social interaction, and the things that are changing in their lives. Yeah.
Yeah. I lost my train of thought again. Oh, have you heard the concept of I think it's finite versus infinite games?
No.
I was listening to it. A friend sent me a video of a guy talking about it. He wasn't the guy that came up with it, but he was talking about the idea that there's finite games, and finite games are like Monopoly.
Okay.
Like you win Monopoly at some point, and there's one winner. Whereas like fitness is an infinite. I think he called it infinite, or maybe it was non-finite or whatever it was. But regardless, the idea was that it's the opposite of what I was saying earlier, is this: you go into it thinking that you're going to get healthy and then be done, but you start winning the game once you playing, because it's a game that has infinite iterations.
Right.
And so every time you go in, you've won the game, because that's you becoming a person that plays the game.
Yeah, and I think that's part of the thing with exercises. People think, okay, I'm going to work out, I'm going to hit this, like whatever their goal is with fitness, and then after that, then what? And then now it's maintenance probably, but for them it's like the motivation is no longer there. Yeah. So that's why you see a lot of people lose a lot of weight or build a lot of muscle, and then all of a sudden it drops. And why is that? It's because they lost their motivation, because their motivation was something that wasn't lifelong. Yeah. Well,
especially, yeah. And one of the huge issues with that is when you put all that motivation into one moment like that, you get there and then you're like,
now what?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's not that cool anymore.
And I'm getting into meditation and stuff too. So it's more like, how can I live my life in a way that I feel happier? And for me, it's exercise, because when I exercise, I feel good. I can move better and I have more energy. So those are the things. And also obviously I'm biased because I love Peak, but I love the people there. So sometimes I'm like, oh, it's 6 a.m. I don't want to go if I'm in someone else's class. Obviously, when I'm teaching, I have to go. But say like I signed up for a class on Thursday. I was like, oh, I'm tired. And I'm like, oh, but Carrie and Bobby and all my friends are going to be there. So it's like, it's motivating because it's like, I'm going to go see them. And yeah. And then after you feel good. So you get that reward.
Yeah. Totally. Yeah. I know that very well. I actually just canceled my gym membership. And that was one of the biggest things I was worried about was that I wasn't going to see the people at the gym anymore. I was like, oh, shoot.
Gonna miss these people.
Yeah. Luckily, I'm fortunate enough to have quite a bit of equipment here.
Yeah.
So I can, but it is weird. It's also weird working out alone sometimes. I really like
sad.
it. But
says the group fitness instructor.
But yeah, because it is like it's cool. Because you can focus on yourself. And there's no distractions. There's nobody using the machine that you want to use. But then also, like, there's nobody to talk to. Like,
yeah. I am, like, I'm a personal trainer and I still can't train by myself. Yeah. Like, I can if I'm on vacation or something. I'll be like, okay, I'll go to the gym and it's fine. But I feel like I'm not pushing myself as much. Because it's that group motivation. And it's like, all right, my friend's doing this. I can do it too. Or, so there's a real benefit to group fitness. And I think we kind of forget that. Like historically, we moved in groups, we danced in groups, we did things together, and that community is so important. And so I think when we think about going to the gym and just doing it for yourself, unless you have your gym friends, it's just hard to actually want to keep doing it. Whereas if you're moving as a group and you're moving together, there's so much benefit to that, like mentally. Yeah.
Well, even sometimes the benefit, honestly, is just that you don't want to fall behind. I know sometimes when I go to the gym with buddies, I get in there and I realize that I haven't been pushing myself that hard anymore because then they'll say like, "Come on, you can do a little bit more," or like they'll say things like, "You need to go lower on that movement" and stuff. I'm like, you get annoyed because you're like, "You're right." I'm only annoyed because you're pointing out the fact that I've been lackluster about this lately.
Yeah, and I used to train like in a gym setting where I would go work out, and I just find that I train differently now than I did, and I'm stronger than I've ever been. And so like a lot of people are like, you have to lift heavy and do all these things, and obviously there's benefit to that, but I went with my brother, he lives out of town, and I went to the gym with him, and he had a leg press, and I haven't leg pressed in years because at our gym we have like a lot of dumbbells and kettlebells, and we do squats, and the Versa Climber is really good for your legs, but it's not heavy lifting. And so when I got into the leg press, I was surprised with how strong I was because I could leg press what I did years ago. I was like, that's interesting. And so I'd like to learn more about that as well, of like, we kind of forgot how important like body weight is. Like body weight exercise, like push-ups. So yeah, you don't necessarily need to do as much lifting as you do unless you're like doing it for a purpose or a function. But yeah, it's really interesting too, because I see actually a lot of pushback away from this idea that you need to do heavy lifts to get stronger, even sometimes in the bodybuilding community. Like there's a guy I follow who's an exercise scientist named Dr. Mike Israetel, and he talks about that a lot. Like lots of his videos are just like dispelling myths, and one of the topics he visits a lot is heavy compound lifts. It's like you don't need to do heavy squats to get strong legs. And I believe that because I don't lift a lot in my squats and my legs are really strong. So that's cool. And even like arms, like we do a lot of like body weight movements, so like push-ups and planking and things like that. We do have dumbbells, which I like the feeling of a dumbbell as well, or a kettlebell, but it's interesting that you can maintain that muscle in different ways. And I think you said the myths of fitness are just so cool to me. It's so interesting.
They are so cool especially because they're so persistent. And people get really caught up in them and they don't want to
they will fight you.
Yeah.
And same with no nutrition. Reason. Yeah. I have a lot of arguments with that.
I bet.
Yeah, I've kind of shifted my viewpoint on nutrition too. So
that one probably even more so.
There's a lot of contradictory advice and like who's giving the advice and what are they trying to get out of it. So that one's freaky too, because some of it, like with fitness myths, if somebody telling somebody like you need to squat to have big legs,
That's not going to hurt that person unless they're badly.
Actually, my friend just hurt his back. He went to the gym, lifted too heavy, hadn't lifted in a long time, and hurt his back that way. But I know what you're saying.
Yeah. I guess I shouldn't be so strict about it. But if you, there's lots of people that are giving fitness advice or nutrition advice that's like, you might actually hurt someone. Like I saw one and this, I don't even know if you could classify this as nutrition advice, because it's like, it probably was just actually malice. But there's this lady that was like in some cult, and she was trying to talk about something to some remedy for sickness, and I might be speaking poorly about this or wrongly about this, but is tea tree oil is like an essential oil or something, right? Yeah, okay, yeah. She was saying to put tea tree oil in like your tea and mix it with like a bunch of other things, and then like a couple of them were like products that I wish I remember them, but a couple of these products she said to mix were actually ones that if you bought, they said they were not safe for consumption. And so like I don't know if you can call that nutrition advice. Yeah. But,
I think it is in a way. Like a lot of people who come to me, they are on these crazy diets, and I've been one of those people that have followed intense, insane diets just because someone told me to do that. But like I'm doing an intuitive eating course right now, and these 2 registered dietitians found that a lot of people would come to them and they would follow their advice of eating lean proteins and veggies and all these things. They'd lose a lot of weight, or they'd get to the point where they wanted to with their nutrition of feeling good, and then all of a sudden they're back gaining all the weight, or they're doing the things that they used to do. And so these dietitians decided to kind of investigate it more, and they looked into like starvation studies and learned more about how your brain, when you mentally restrict something, so you're like, oh, I shouldn't eat that piece of cake, your metabolism slows. And there's things happening just from a mental restriction. And so that to me is really cool, because I think a lot of the times people think, oh, you need to eat this, you need to do this, don't do that. And I think for a lot of us, we just need to be kinder to ourselves and kind of listen to what is working for us. Yeah. And so like we talked about before, it's like what I eat shouldn't look like what you eat, and that's okay. And so there's just like arguments of how important is nutrition for long-term health. And I think there was a 104-year-old physician who talks about this woman. She's really old and doesn't really care about her nutrition necessarily, but she's like, my focus is on my happiness. And so like what is more important? And obviously we feel good when we eat fruits and vegetables, and there's things that we need in our bodies. But she talks about like how she thinks that she's lived so long because she is happy. And so are all of these like crazy nutrition things as important as we think they are?
Yeah, well, that is definitely nothing to scoff at. Yeah. Because your mental
health-wise.
Yeah. Because it's just that's so highly correlated with living long. Just feeling, sometimes obviously happiness and happy about your life, but also just like things like satisfied. Yeah. And feeling like you're doing something that's meaningful.
You need purpose. Yeah. And she talks about purpose as well, like happiness and purpose and why they're so important. Living your values, and so. Yeah, but I think in terms of nutrition, I just tell people like, just be kinder to yourself and see what happens. Just like kind of listen to what's going on in your body. Are you honoring your hunger? Are you eating enough throughout the day? Because a lot of the times, like for myself, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm a binge eater. Because I would be on these crazy diets and all of a sudden I just want to eat. And that is a natural response. It's like your biology that you're fighting. When you're restricting, all of a sudden you want to binge eat, and that's your body trying to protect you. So there's a lot that we do in nutrition that if we just shifted it slightly and we're just like, okay, I can have that cake whenever I want it, you'll notice, oh, I don't actually want it that often, but I wanted it when it was restricted. So yeah. And when you're fighting your biology, it's like we have this idea that the thinking part of us is stronger than the unthinking part of the brain. Well, we think it's willpower, but there's a lot more going on. And I would argue that lack of willpower is not actually what's happening with people when they're binge eating.
No. I would agree with you, because the systems in your brain that govern things like hunger and your autonomous function, are far, far older than the part of your brain that they think consciousness is coming from. So the idea that you can just think your way out of it, or willpower your way out of it, is a little bit naive sometimes.
That's where we failed a lot of people, right? Yeah. They're like, I just need to be stronger in this, and I need to stop eating treats, and I need to do all these things. When really, if they just allowed it, they'd probably notice a shift in their nutrition.
Yeah.
To being healthier naturally. So.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because you're fighting ancient systems that are trying to keep you alive.
Yeah, and there's a lot of nutrition or dietitians who talk about eating at home more. You'll be healthier if you eat at home rather than going out to eat all of the time if you can. So for a lot of us, it's like, even if you're not necessarily like watching what you're eating at home, if you just eat at home more, you're probably going to get more balanced meals.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense.
Less processed foods.
Yeah. And we talked about like on the fitness side, balancing things based on what works for you as well.
Yeah.
And it seems like it would almost be more important on the nutrition side too. Like, for example, out of personal experience, my girlfriend is dieting right now, and
she's what?
Dieting.
Oh, dieting.
So did I say dying?
I thought you said dying.
No,
I was like, oh, it's gone heavy.
No, thankfully not. No, she's dieting right now.
Okay.
Or I don't even say dieting. She's following the meal plan.
Yeah, but that's dieting.
But one of the differences between her and I'm not really following a meal plan. I'm say trying to lose a little bit of weight right now, but like super loosely. I don't even know if trying is an appropriate word. But anyway, when I do diet, my appetite attenuates so fast. I just like my hunger falls right off a cliff. I don't struggle that much with eating less. But
eventually,
I've gone pretty long sometimes
But sometimes do you like? I guess like how long are these diets? So you can diet for months and months and months, and so like in the starvation studies that I've read about, it's. These people are starving for 6 months, like eating less calories is a form of starvation. And so they're starving, and then eventually when they allow foods again, they're eating like over 10,000 calories a day because their body's like, okay, that was a starvation period. So now I'm going to eat. And now it's harder. Like maybe for a while it works. And I've been on diets where I did them like successfully for a while, but then eventually it does fall off. And there's always a reason why you need a new diet. It's because they don't work. Yeah. And so if you're trying in terms of like your diet, you could try to be like, I'm going to try to eat more plants. Think of it as like adding stuff. Like I'm going to try to eat more fruits and vegetables and notice how I feel. And yeah, that's actually more beneficial than trying to follow a certain diet.
And wouldn't that be following a certain diet as well?
Well, like your diet, I guess, can be like what you're consuming, but following a planned diet, I would argue that would be like a form of restriction. So like if they're like eat a chicken breast and this amount of lettuce and avoid these things, as soon as you're going avoid, automatically your brain's like, I want that. And maybe not at first, maybe you have strong willpower, as they talk about, for a while, but then eventually you'll notice that you're craving more carbs, you're craving more sugar. There's things that are happening in your body, and it's because it feels like it's starving. Yeah.
Okay, I see.
Yeah.
And so that's not appropriate at any time, like restrictive eating, or?
So it would be, there's an argument to that of like if you're experiencing some sort of medical thing where you need to follow a diet for reasons, and it doesn't mean that you can't have dietary things. So like for example, if you have diabetes, obviously you need to eat a certain way, but there's a way of doing it so that your brain's not like, okay, we're restricting and now I want to binge eat, or okay, I'm going to slow your metabolism down because you're not giving me enough food. So the argument of calories in, calories out, and this is super we'll see what people say about this part, but basically what I've learned in research is that if you eat a certain amount of calories at a deficit, eventually your body knows how to do that. So it just, you need less and less calories. Yeah. No, I would agree with you. Yeah. So that's why people plateau, right? So they're eating whatever the diet told them to do, and then eventually they can live on less calories. So you'll notice, like, even with my own clients, it's like, okay, we're eating 1,500 calories. Like back when I used to track, it's like, okay, they're eating 1,500 calories a day, and eventually they stopped losing weight. And at the time I was like, oh, they must be cheating, or, you know, like we have all these things that were like, why? But now I'm learning it's because their body is adapting. And so their body's like, okay, if that's what you're giving me, I'm going to adapt. I'm going to slow your metabolism down. I'm going to increase your ghrelin, which is your appetite hormone. And so there's things happening that kind of makes, like, when you're restricting, basically your body wants you to eat more. But if it notices that you've been doing these things for a while, it now needs less.
Yeah. Right. Is there a place, I guess, for, I guess it would still be restrictive. Is there a place for restrictive eating that's not at such a pace that it's creating great diet fatigue? And if it is creating great diet fatigue, just taking diet breaks in between?
That's a good question. I would argue that probably, like, obviously I'm not a registered dietitian, and so there's people better versed in this, but there are dietitians now who believe in, like, listening to your body more. And so when you're on a diet, if you're following a specific way of eating, the days where you are hungry, if you're not allowing that food, so say you ate supper and you're saying, oh, I can't eat anymore, I'm done my calories for the day, or my macros, or whatever you're counting, then your body is going into starvation mode, because it's like, okay, you're not giving me the food I want. Yeah. Okay.
And what is starvation mode, I guess?
So that's when your body thinks that you're starving it, or it really thinks you're in a famine. Okay. So basically your body's thinking, okay, we're not going to see food for a while here, so I'm going to slow the metabolism and increase ghrelin, and there's things that are going on. And so that's why that biological need to eat is like, oh, I want carbs. All of a sudden you're craving, like, high carb foods, and so it kind of shifts what you want. And, like, a lot of the times when people are on diets, like I said, they're losing muscle rather than fat. Yeah,
right. And so is a starvation mode, like, is that inherently bad? Like, obviously if you're not giving your body the food it needs, that's bad, but is there, like, once it's operating in this system, is it like that the metabolic functions of your body are actually deteriorating, or?
I think so. They talk about, like, weight set points, right? So, like, when you were born, there's, like, there's a certain weight, like, within a range that your body's meant to be at, right? So I don't know, say like 150 to 190, give or take. And so, like, depending on the person. And so I think of metabolism as like a thermometer. And so eventually, if I start pulling that thermometer down, it's going to want to go back up. So I'm losing weight. If I'm doing it in a way where I'm restricting, then now it's going to want to try to go back. So it's always trying to go back to homeostasis, which is within the set point range. And so over time, people gain weight, and they're up here because they've actually messed with their weight set points.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, could it be important to actually incorporate a restrictive eating system at a point where, like, if you've taken your body to a point where it's perceived homeostasis is far above what would actually be healthier? So
I'm guessing you're coming from the bodybuilding perspective of, like, what you need for gains. And so, like, you can eat in a certain way to, like, build more muscle and things that happen. I just know a lot of bodybuilders who have a lot of fat after they retire, right? Because their body is now like, okay, I've destroyed my metabolism. Yeah. And so, yeah, if that answers the question. Kind of.
I meant, like, a little bit more along the lines of, like, if somebody is taking themselves to a point where their body composition is alarming to their doctor.
Oh, okay.
And, yeah.
So there's a lot of research on why that is. So when we think about obesity research, a lot of it was like, who's paying for this?
Okay.
And so who do you think would be paying for obesity research?
Yeah, well,
people who are making money off you dieting. Like, it doesn't mean to say that there aren't valid arguments about why we don't want to weigh a certain amount, but I would argue that being obese isn't the indicator of health. The indicator of health is lifestyle. So is this person moving? And we know that BMI is kind of garbage. So, like, on a BMI, I would be obese or, you know,
Yeah,
so so it's like, but I have a lot of muscle. So technically it's like what, I guess like if that person is obese, is it because they're not moving, not eating well, all of these things, or is it that they're like a bigger bodied person and they do work out and they do eat well and things like that? So there's just less, like a lot of the times we think like obesity equals unhealthy or fat, I should say, like fat equals unhealthy, and that's not necessarily the case. So I think a lot of the obesity research that I've been looking into recently, it's like, okay, what are they studying, and are they looking at other things going on? So like if this person is obese, is their health complications and things happening, or are we like just saying because they're fat this is happening? Yeah.
Okay, you talked earlier about like instead of restrictive eating, like changing what you're eating. Is that what you meant by intuitive eating?
Yeah, so intuitive eating is just I would classify as like a mindful eating practice, which is hard at first because we're so used to, like, if you're doing bodybuilding, like I used to work in a gym and they'd tell me like eat plain chicken breast and you know, and I actually lost a lot of muscle because I could follow those diets when I was 20, and then eventually it's like, oh my gosh, I don't want to do this anymore, and it's harder, and my metabolism has slowed, obviously with age, but also like because I messed with it so bad when I was in my 20s. And so I guess to answer your question, like you're asking, can we do that short term or?
No, I actually don't think I understand it quite fully. Like it just went into intuitive
like
eating.
what it is.
Yeah. Sorry, I should.
So it's just like intuitive eating is more just like a dietitian, like these two registered dietitians created this program because they were finding, okay, my clients keep losing weight and then coming back and they were like gaining weight. And so intuitive eating is, to me, like you'll see it in different ways. So other registered dietitians will talk about mindful eating. So it's honoring your hunger, but also being able to tell when you're full. So there's like a scale that they use where it's like when you hit primal hunger. So when you let yourself get really hungry, you know, when you like forget to eat lunch or something and all of a sudden you're like, oh my God, I'm going to eat all this food and like bear paw, I call it. It's because you've hit your primal hunger. And now you just want to eat everything in sight, and there's a reason for that. And so they've created like 10 things that you need to do to eat intuitively. And one is listening to your hunger, listening to your fullness, which for me was so hard because I'd followed diets for forever. So I used to be proud of myself if I didn't eat before bed, or, you know, whatever the rule was, like, like go to bed hungry. Awesome. Like I really am kicking this diet's ass. And so there's other parts. So they do talk about mindful movement. So moving in a way that you feel good. And they talk about, basically there's 10 principles. And so one of the things in Canada that we're bad at, in the States as well, is satisfaction with food. And so a lot of the times we are not allowing ourselves to eat the foods that make us feel satisfied. So for example, like one of the things was we used to take out butter out of everything, but butter is something that you feel full after, right? With the fat. So satisfaction in food is one of the reasons why you might be eating more than you need, because it's like you're not allowing yourself to enjoy it. And so in the States and Canada, we have the most food guilt and the most rates of obesity.
Yeah, I can totally see that.
Yeah, and we're always like, don't eat this. Oh my gosh, I ate that. I shouldn't have eaten that. And there's a lot of guilt associated to that. And so they talk about why you actually want to enjoy your food, why you should be sitting down and eating at a table without distractions. A lot of us are eating and looking at our food, our phones, so we don't even know when we're full.
Yeah.
And also, maybe you've been following diets, so it's hard to tell. I still struggle with that one. I can't always tell when I'm full. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a tough one for a lot of people.
And there's fullness levels as well.
Yeah. That made me think too of the idea of like the falling off the bandwagon or falling off the wagon idea. It happens with find it with people that are trying to stop drinking, so alcoholics and smokers, and obviously lots of other
anything.
addictions. It's the idea, like, if you've quit smoking and you've successfully quit smoking for 3 months, and you have a cigarette, and you actually were able to successfully just have one cigarette, and you didn't feel like having more afterwards, but then for whatever reason in your mind, it's like, well, I've had one, I've fallen off, I might as well just start again.
So it's called the all or nothing mentality.
Right. Okay, yeah. That's what I was looking for.
So the all or nothing mentality around food is very common, because it's like, and fitness. So it's like, okay, I'm going to eat perfectly. Oh, now I ate a Blizzard. Like, I ruined everything, so now I'm just gonna allow myself to eat whatever I want for that day, and then all of a sudden the next day you're like going to the gym and have to make up for it. And so I think that's it's kind of like a societal thing that we have, is this all or nothing. Like, if we're not going to the gym every day and eating well, then we're just eating Cheetos on our couch. And so what is the in-between, and what does that look like? And that's something I myself still struggle with, as like someone who dieted for years and years and years. If I allow, we call it like neutralizing foods, which is really important. And so if you think about it, there are foods that you enjoy, but most of the foods that I think about that I enjoyed a crazy amount, it's because I didn't allow them. So for me, it was like, you're not allowed to eat chips. And so what did I want? I wanted chips. If I was going to have, like, people talk about cheat days or all these things, if I allowed that, I would just binge eat it, like, automatically. So now I'm trying to, like, neutralize chips. And back in the day, I was like, I can't have them in my house. Like, I have no willpower. I'm terrible. But now I know that it's because I didn't allow them.
Yeah.
And so now that I allow them, they can be in my house. And I'm not going to binge eat them, because I know if I eat a huge bag of chips, I'm not going to perform well in the gym. I'm not going to feel good at work. Like, I'm going to be tired. So.
And a lot of times we want the forbidden fruit too, so it makes it even.
Yeah, it's human nature for sure.
We've been talking for an hour and 16 minutes now. Do you have more time, or like?
Yeah, I do, but it's up to you.
No, I'd like to keep going. I just don't want to. I want to make sure I'm not keeping you from anything.
I can talk a lot, so you just cut me off when you need to.
Okay, perfect. No, this is great. I found, I don't know if there's a word for this, or if it's a technique, or if this is something people already talk about. But for myself, I found that paying attention to the foods that actually just like made me feel bad, and then swapping them out with other things. Were like perfect ways to change my diet. So for example, I used to like do the same thing. I'd eat Oreos and chips all the time. And then I started eating, like forcing myself to eat healthier, and following kind of what we were talking about earlier is not always necessarily the best thing, but a restrictive plan, and then cutting things out. But that, at least doing that, helped me notice that I felt better when I was eating healthier.
And then you were able to do it from an intuitive standpoint.
Yeah, exactly. I was able to roll it over into an area where it wasn't I wasn't following a specific plan anymore, but I could look at the chips and then look at an orange and actually just think like, no, I'm going to feel better if I eat the orange. And so I don't crave that stuff much
and
anymore.
Oftentimes I think in intuitive eating we talk about allowing the chips, but then it's like, okay, I also need like a yogurt dip with this and some grapes to kind of feel more like, I know I'll feel better if I eat this, and then maybe I'm having like 3 chips or whatever. But you just feel better when you're eating like more well-rounded. Yeah. And noticing, like, for me, I have ADHD as well, like I said. So I took a whole course on ADHD nutrition. That's a whole nother thing. So there's like, you might be wanting the crunch. So a lot of the times it's like, what am I actually wanting? And in intuitive eating, they talk about emotional, dealing with your emotions is one of the principles. And so when you're dealing with your emotions, you might notice that, I don't actually want to eat a bunch of food. I'm bored. And actually naming those emotions in more of a, I guess, like right now, people are just like, I'm angry, instead of saying like, I'm upset by this, or I feel disappointed, or kind of like naming the emotion more. And there's a whole piece of that, and like why people choose foods based on their emotions. And just starting to notice, if you cope with your emotions on a healthy level, like, okay, I am sad. Like, what could I do to feel better about this in a way that is good for me? Maybe it's like doing yoga or getting into the mindfulness piece, it's like, am I hungry? So that's why it's important to be like, okay, first, am I hungry? And doing a little check-in. And if you are hungry, when did you eat? And so with intuitive eating, they want you to eat, like really we should be eating every 2 to 4 hours, depending. And so if we're eating every 2 to 4 hours, you're probably going to notice that you aren't going to binge eat. And so that being said, there's like that big window from lunch to dinner where oftentimes people aren't eating in between. So if they're going 6 hours without eating, when they hit 6 p.m. and it's dinner time, they will be in primal hunger.
Yeah.
But if they had like a snack with like peanuts and an orange or something at 2 p.m., 4 p.m., then they'll notice, oh, I can make choices that help me feel better. And then also if they had a stressful day at work, am I going home and eating because I'm stressed? And it kind of all comes into play of noticing your hunger, noticing your fullness, checking in with your emotions. And so there's an emotional side to it, but it's not what we would call like necessarily like in the diet industry of like you're emotionally eating. It's just that you are noticing why you're doing what you're doing. And that's the intuitive piece.
Yeah. That makes sense. With the like eating every 2 to 4 hours, is that like, what about if people just, I guess like what about for a person that they don't have a problem with getting super hungry in the evening or binge eating or anything like that, and they're just not that hungry for most of the day? So
I would argue that a lot of people are hungry without noticing, because they think that hunger feels like a certain thing. So there's, like I said, there's a level of hunger, like there's a scale. So you might notice that you're just a little bit grumpy or you have a headache or there's things that are going on. And so my guess is if you're going over 6 hours without eating, you are hungry. That being said, like we fast when we sleep, and then when we wake up, you should be hungry. And if you're not, it's probably just because you're using caffeine or something to get through it. But you maybe don't know what the signs of hunger are for you yet. Does that make sense?
No, it does make sense. Yeah. No, especially because, well, there's like lots of times, I'm sure lots of people, I would hope that most people have experienced this enough, at least to notice it so that they know that it's something they can do in their life. But yeah, if you're angry, you can have a snack and it's probably gonna...
Hangry is the thing. Yeah. That is my thing. Yeah. And I think that happens for a lot of people where, they just don't know that they're hungry, and then they have an apple and they're like, oh, I feel like I have more energy now and starting to feel better. And so that's really like learning to listen to your body is really important, but it's hard at first because we do ignore it a lot of the times. Even just sitting here, my foot's kind of falling asleep, you know? So it's like the things that you kind of get distracted by work or whatever is going on in your life, and we're not allowing ourselves the time to kind of do check-ins. And a lot of that is screens, constantly being distracted. And so if we're only eating when we're distracted, it's hard to tell.
Do people get kind of, I don't know how to phrase this, do people fall into an issue sometimes where when they're eating more frequently, they kind of forget that it's not supposed to be full meals, and then they start eating
not if they're honoring their fullness. So if you're honoring your fullness, like I notice sometimes I'll eat like half of an apple, or I'll eat like a handful of nuts, and I notice that my plate's often not like before I started intuitive eating, it was like my plate was always empty because I thought that I knew what I needed. And so if you're always eating and your plate's always empty, either maybe you're not giving yourself enough food, or you're not listening to your body because you're like, Kate, this is what I need to eat. This is in front of me. But if you there's like things that you can do to tune in. Part of it's eating slower, noticing, checking in. How does your belly feel? So there's like physical sensations that are happening as you start to become more full. But if you're just eating really quickly, say like you have a half-hour lunch break and you're just going to scarf down a sandwich and something and go, you can't tell. And there are times where that will happen, but it's just kind of like recognizing that, okay, yeah, I forgot to eat, or this happened. And so we call that unintentional restriction when you forget to eat, or... So, and I do that a lot where I'm like, oh, I forgot to eat my snack, and this is why I'm like so hungry right now, that I'm in primal hunger. And then for myself, I just like try to calm myself down. Maybe have like a few bites of something and be like, okay, calm down. You're not in primal hunger. Like, or you're in primal hunger, but that's okay. It happens. And then just like resetting before you eat. Yeah.
Kind of like warming up and do it a little bit.
Kind of, yeah. Because it's like if you say you forgot to eat all day, maybe you ate like breakfast and then work was really nuts and you didn't eat all day. All of a sudden it's 5 p.m. You're really hungry and you just want to like go home and binge eat. Then you'll kind of notice that, okay, this is why, and it's okay, it happened, but you know why you're doing what you're doing, and it's not a like shame thing after. Yeah, because I think a lot of food is, we feel shame when we don't eat the way that we think we should, and so if we're just kinder to ourselves, you'll notice that it kind of starts to shift.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, well, and like you mentioned too, just like paying attention to it, because if you're not paying attention to it, you don't know what you're doing, right? Like I find for this, I guess this is not exactly the same, but for whatever reason, it's I do it alone sometimes too, but mostly when I'm eating with other people, I just, hungry or not, I'll just inhale it.
That's pretty normal.
Yeah. And so there's been like lots of times actually where I'm sure that, like you said, I'm sure this happens to lots of people, but I'll just like push my plate in front of me and just like sit for a second, and people will be like, are you all right? I'm like, yeah, I just need to, I don't know why.
Well, we do eat more in groups. The larger the group, the more you eat usually. And so I think, like you said, just doing a little check-in if you're in that situation. And it doesn't mean it has to, like, nutrition shouldn't be perfect. And we have this idea that it should be. And we're like, oh, if it's not perfect, we're failing at it. But really, we know that eating a donut one day is not going to affect long-term health. Yeah.
I guess a question that popped into my head earlier, I'm sorry to jump back a little bit, but with intuitive eating too, and just like, instead of restricting, what about, like, is there examples where people will try to do this and it's just not working for them at all? They just can't, like, they need some form of plan, not necessarily like complete
most of the
restriction,
times when that's happened, they're not coping with emotions, or they're not able to tell when they're hungry. And part of that is so they want you to focus on like being okay in your current body size, which for a lot of people is a struggle. And they're getting these outside messages of, I need to look a certain way. So when those messages start to creep up, they are either like mentally restricting, or even just be like, oh, this isn't working, I need to go on this crazy diet again. But it does work over time. It's hard for people because it's not instant, right? When you start doing it, it's a practice. So we call it a practice of eating in a way that is good for us. But that practice is challenging at first, because it's going against what we were taught. Yeah. About health and yeah.
So with that, I guess, how does this is,
people are always blown away with this. They're like, what do you mean I can eat whatever I want at any time? They're like, I'll just eat pizza all the time. And I'm like, well, no, because if I said you can eat pizza all of the time, you're going to eat pizza for breakfast, for lunch, and for dinner. And then eventually you're going to be like, I'm sick of this. So we do want to allow variety with foods. Yeah.
That's kind of was where my mind was going. I didn't know how to segue into it, but I guess with the variety piece, like, does the typical like food, I don't even know what it is anymore, food pyramid schedule,
like Canada Food Guide or something.
Does that fit in with a lot of this stuff? Is it pretty agreeable, or is it?
Well, there's a lot of controversy with the Canadian Food Guide.
Yeah, I haven't followed it in a long time.
Yeah. So we used to teach it in the curriculum, but now we know, okay, there's a lot of like dairy in there and things that may not necessarily be what we need, just based on who funded it. And so that's the thing about nutrition too, is like,
weren't they at one point like showing like pretty bad like breakfast cereals were like necessary?
Yeah, I think they were like very heavy to like farmers. So it was like eggs and dairy and lots of bread and things like that. So yeah, I think in terms of intuitive eating, the first part is allowing all foods at all times. And so for a lot of people, they're like, I'm just gonna eat Big Macs every day or whatever. Yeah. But it's because you've been restricting. So you'll notice when you first start allowing all foods at all times, you want those things. And my husband, he is a binge eater, I would say. Like he like loves his sugar, which there's different reasons for that. A lot of it is energy that you need, but or you think that you're replacing it. But for him, it's like, I'll just eat candy all day and chocolates all day. But eventually, if you actually allowed it, you won't. Like I don't really crave foods the way I used to, but I enjoy foods. So sometimes maybe an example would be like a dessert. In the past, I would have just eaten it because, like, the whole thing, because I knew I wasn't going to allow it again coming up or, like, the next day. And so I would just eat more than that I needed. And so now maybe I'll just have, like, 2 bites of a dessert and be like, you know what, I'm pretty good.
Yeah.
And, like, you can always pack it up, put it in your fridge and eat it whenever you want. So then knowing that, you want it less, which is kind of funny.
It is funny. It's weird the way you think about it that way sometimes.
Yeah. And so, like, I do find I feel better when I eat, like, fish and lean proteins and salads and vegetables. And so there's a reason for that. But, yeah. You do want variety in foods, but...
I struggle with that one, too. Like, the eating just a little bit of it and putting it away. Especially if I'm at a restaurant. And it's not even, like... It's not... A lot of the time, it's not, like, a fullness thing or an appetite or whether I like the food. I just... Sometimes I
don't bring it home.
I have a hard time, like, just on principle. I'm like, I don't want to pack it up. I don't want to throw it out.
Yeah, and that's a hard part for people. So with intuitive eating, we talk about you can throw the cake in the garbage. You can throw the food in the garbage because if you're just overeating, you're actually wasting it anyway.
Yeah, actually, I've never thought about it that way. That's a good way to put it, yeah.
And so if it's about, like, I don't want to waste food, which we were all raised that way, and I don't like wasting food. I have a lot of random containers that I just have with me, and I'll just pack up, like, a tiny bit and take it home, and then maybe I eat it with my next meal or whatever. So it doesn't need to look a certain way that we think,
No, I mean, that's really helpful, because I never thought about it from the perspective of you can waste food that you're eating.
Yes, so, you're overeating, and you're gonna feel bad after, and you're gonna feel tired, and there's all these things. And it's not that you feel shame when it happens. You're just like, okay, I did overeat, so why do I think that was? And usually there's a reason. Maybe it was emotional, maybe it was a tradition, like a family thing, and that connection is important too. Or maybe it was just like, I didn't allow that food for a long time, so now I'm just gonna allow it. Yeah.
And so, you talked about, like, for yourself, liking like fish and lean proteins more, and there's on top of, like, the how to eat, whether it's intuitive, restrictive, there's all these arguments. There's also just, like, the arguments about, like, what you should put in your body, and, like, things like, I find that in my experience, what I'm saying is even more so than just what you should put in. There's a lot of it now is like what you should avoid.
Right.
And it's complete demonization of a lot of foods.
Right. And so obviously we're eating way more processed foods than we once did. And so you can kind of play with that in terms of, okay, why do I believe this about this food? So, like, for me, it was like, don't eat yogurt. That was one of my food beliefs. So part of that is unpacking the food belief. So was it you that created the food belief, or was it that you were on a diet that said don't do this for whatever reason? And what was the reason? And if I eat the food, how do I feel after? And kind of like noticing those things. So it is a practice. So like I said, if you're eating a lot of processed foods, a lot of salt, a lot of things, you're going to notice that you don't feel the best usually. And so primarily plants, I feel better, I have more energy. I notice if I eat an apple in the morning, I don't need as much caffeine. I actually used to chug coffee all day and thought I needed it. And now I'm recognizing that I actually don't need that much coffee, but I thought I did, but it was just how I was eating.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's interesting too. I try to pay attention to that a little bit more myself.
And
too.
My sleep's better.
Yeah. Because
I usually don't drink caffeine past like 11 a.m. Today I did, but yeah. That's a weird one. Like, some people are super sensitive to everything. Obviously there's differences, but like caffeine is so interesting because some people are just wired off of a little bit. And then other people are not. And then even within people, those differences happen. Like, I've had days where I have a cup of coffee. And obviously, like, it's hard to account for whether your diet was coffee's a really good pre-workout.
Yeah. Yeah.
Coffee and apples. And people are like, I need this pre-workout that makes me all jittery. And I was like, try coffee or try an apple. And they're like, what?
Yeah, and because to go back to supplements, you think that you need all these crazy things to make you feel good in the gym, but I've done that before. Just had a cup of coffee before, and it is extremely helpful. So.
Yeah, for sure. And a lot of that has to do with recovery too, right? So people are taking supplements for recovery, but they're not stretching. Or like there's other things going on that are leading to less recovery.
Yeah. Yeah, and we'll go on back to like the athlete piece I was talking about earlier, is that if you don't know the reason they're taking that supplement is because they think it's a magic cure, or if because they've maxed out every other element of whatever they're trying to achieve with that.
Yeah.
And this is just the next logical step.
Yeah, and like with athletes, there's a whole nother component because they're doing it for performance. Versus like for most of us, we're not doing it for performance. So we eat differently.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but unfortunately, so many people, that's their idols, right? So they're looking at it that way and trying to make it seem the same for them.
Exactly. Yeah. And so when you have like a normal person trying to eat like an elite athlete, they may be eating differently. That being said, we had, I was talking to an athlete who used to come to Peak, and he was talking about how in certain like he's hockey, so it's like in hockey they don't actually eat a specific way. They just do a lot of things differently. So yeah.
Well, and it's interesting to learn the way that different sports and different disciplines do things too, because a lot of it is not taught. I remember growing up in sports, and I didn't learn anything about nutrition in sports
and there are like dietitians who are really good at what they do for performance. And so, but I do see a lot of high performance athletes who after the fact, like I was talking to an ex rower, and she was like a gymnast and a rower, and so after the fact found that she developed Graves' disease. So it's just what else is it messing with? And so like a lot of, and I need to research this more because I haven't looked into it too much, but I kind of noticed like a lot of athletes who are training a certain way and doing a lot of things a certain way for their life are developing these autoimmune disorders. And so like, why is that? Is that like how they're eating, or like they're not listening to their bodies? And yeah,
that's really interesting. Well, yeah, because you can push yourself really, really hard if you are so hyper focused on a goal.
Well, I always say I was an exercise bulimic. So like back in the day, so it's not bulimia, it's just like I would over exercise. And so a lot of athletes over exercise and they work out too much, and then they develop other health complications later once they're older. Yeah,
I can see that too. I know like some people too, it's not always necessarily like this. In this example, it's not necessarily a disease or a metabolic malfunction, but just that they don't realize that they can't always, maybe this is what you were saying, but they can't always keep the same diet going into the regular life afterwards.
Well, it's not always realistic. Maybe they're older now, maybe they have kids, maybe they have things going on. So how we eat is also like for a lot of us, it's kind of like an elitist thing. Like I can eat this way because I can afford to eat this way. So there's also like food scarcity and things that come into play that we often don't talk about.
Yeah. That's a tough one, right?
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack in that. But if you're eating a certain way, it's probably because you can afford to eat a certain way and you're educated on it and you know what to eat, and it's so interesting. I have a buddy who's studying pharmacy, and he was talking about that. He was talking about the fact that he said in his studies that what they're learning is that for most people that are interested in supplements, vitamins, and minerals, are not necessarily going to need them, and it's not because those things don't work, which is the argument a lot of the time. Even if they do work, if you are in a point where you're looking at incorporating them into your diet, you've probably already got it figured out in your diet. You don't need to go out and supplement it, because I think the way he put it was that the people that are wealthy enough to be looking into those things already have comprehensive diets that will have, like, you're not missing out on X, Y, and Z because it's in your diet. So don't go and buy the supplement. Yeah. And even we have a naturopath who comes to Peak, and I go to her sometimes, and we were talking about the supplements I was on, and she's like, you don't need calcium right now. Like, why are you taking it? And I was like, what do you mean? Like, I thought everyone needed a calcium supplement. And then she was just talking about like, well, when you're older, you will, but not right now. And so there's a lot that it's like, we're just doing it because we heard that we should. Yeah. But then if you kind of start to be like, why am I doing these things? Do I actually need to? Yeah. Like, I have severe asthma. So also, like, if I don't take my puffer, that's not going to be good for me. But so like, there's different things that you have to take for certain health reasons. But if I'm eating or if I'm taking a certain supplement, why am I doing it?
Yeah.
And kind of questioning it more. Was it like a celebrity who told me to get this vitamin? Yeah.
Yeah, I've noticed that with myself a lot. I've stopped taking a lot of them too.
Well, it's expensive too.
Yeah.
Even vitamins. Yeah.
Yeah, it was like the number one reasons were cost, and then also like just like, am I noticing a difference? What are the odds it's really doing something? Yeah. And then like, is my diet bad? Do I need to be like, it's just all these things where you're like, it's probably not worth the $50 that this stupid little pill bottle costs.
Yeah. So. And even like that comes with like cheaper vitamins versus more expensive, and like, how different are they really? And and if we just buy like a $10 multivitamin, is that as good as the other ones? And there's a lot of debates on that. But I just always tell people to ask why am I doing what I'm doing? Why do I believe this? Where did I get that information from?
Yeah, and where did I get that information from? I don't know if this is your experience, but typically when I'm asking people about supplements, if they know enough about them to give me an opinion about it, they're just automatically hyper recommending of it. So I went into Popeyes a while ago, and I was asking them for a nootropic. Just something to help with focus at work and while doing this. And I was kind of skeptical, but I just wanted to try it. And so I went in, and I asked the guy about the one they had on the shelf, and I said, like, are these like legit? Like, are they doing anything? And he was like, yeah, man, I recommend people to only take the half dose to start off with because it's that potent. And I was like, really? He was like, yeah, like, you'll notice a difference. And so I was like, okay. So I bought it, and it wasn't my experience. Maybe it is, and I don't know. But yeah, it didn't end up working that well. But I guess that was the point I was trying to make. Is a lot of the times when I go to ask people about stuff, and if
we're asking people who are selling it to us, is that a good source?
Yeah, that was the other thing too. Because I'm like, I don't know anybody else that knows about this.
They'll sell you everything if you walk into those places.
So I was like, and then I asked him another question. He gave me a weird answer, and I was kind of like, I don't know if I'd.
Yeah, I always recommend people to try naturopath too. Yeah. I
was trying to talk to one. Not privately. I was trying to talk to one on the podcast, and they never got back to me, which is fair enough.
I'll say Lauren Russell is mine, and she's really great. She's actually intuitive eating or she's studying it as well. So yeah, she's at Summit, but yeah, she looks at health similar to the way I do. So yeah. And there are naturopaths who have like any profession. There are fitness professionals who believe a certain thing, naturopaths as well, but you have to find one that works for you. Yeah.
Well, and then it's just like personalities, right? Like if you're working with the professionals, you want somebody that. And
I always want someone who's more well-rounded. So I always say, like, I believe in like a naturopath with Western medicine to an extent of like, obviously I needed my chemotherapy. So
yeah, you don't want somebody that's completely dismissive.
Yeah. So
because that can get weird too. Like, because you ask somebody something and then they're just like, no, that's bullshit. Like, really? Like, even if you've heard, I've had that before where like I'll hear a ton of times that something doesn't make sense or is a myth. And then I'll ask somebody about it who I'm expecting to give me a pretty rounded perception, and they give me that same answer. And it's kind of weird depending on the person you get that from.
I always just say to beware of people who know everything. Yeah. So if they're saying like, oh, I don't know, maybe we should check that out. That's like a good starting point, because even myself, it's like my beliefs about fitness have changed over the years, or my beliefs about nutrition have changed. And I think as long as you're like investigating stuff, you don't always have to stick to your beliefs forever. It's just like, right now this is working for me. And and I think part of the problem with the health industry is like, people think if you do this it's bad, and if you don't do this you're gonna die. And if we just chilled out a bit and just like we're nicer to ourselves, I think we'd have better things happen. So
I think so too.
Yeah.
Well,
Okay.
was there anything that we didn't cover that you wanted to talk about?
I don't know. I can talk about random things.
Fair enough. No, that was great. Thank you so much. I had a great conversation. I learned a lot.
Yeah.
Where can people find you, or the gym, or
so Peak Climb HIIT, we're on Instagram, Facebook. We have a website too. They can Google us. And then in terms of me, like I do intuitive eating and personal training as well. But that being said, I always say find someone who works within your beliefs and believes what you value. And so yeah.
Great. Thank you so much.
Okay.